Hi grade 9 students, this is Teacher Lester aka Zer Les, and I welcome you all to this educational video. Well, today, you will be joining me to explore more about the music of the world, and this topic is discussed in the third quarter or unit 3 of your module. So without further ado, let's get this discussion started. Our lesson for today is entitled Music of the Romantic Period. For us to be well directed with our discussion for today, let us consider the following standards. First is the content standard or the level of your mastery about the lesson. The learner or you demonstrate an understanding of characteristic features of instrumental romantic music. Second is the performance standard or the level of your skill or the quality of your application regarding the topic discussed. This is the learner or you sing and perform themes of selected instrumental pieces of the Romantic period. And for the learning competencies, or these are the specific objectives of the lesson. First, relate Romantic period music to its historical and cultural background. Second, explain the performance practice during the Romantic period. And third, narrate the life and works of Romantic composers through the use of romantic themes and improvisation of appropriate instrumental accompaniments. And now, let's proceed. First off, let us define Romantic period. Romantic period is a cultural movement in the West in the late 18th century to early 19th century that stressed emotion, imagination, individualism, and freedom of expression. This actually started from the countries in the West or European countries from the year 1820 to 1910. Now, let us stress the definition of romantic music during the Romantic period since we are talking about the field of music. Romantic music is characterized by expanding the formal structure within a composition and making the pieces more passionate and expressive. So, if you are going to interpret this definition, it is getting away from the traditional or conventional way of presenting music. Very formal, very simple, and very elegant. And the romantic music turning this into more expressive and more exaggerated way of expressing ideas and emotions by the composer. One of its main features is nationalism. Nationalism, grade 9 students, is the love of one's country. This is the number one value that DepEd in the Philippines want you to possess as far as Philippine setting is concerned. Example of this main feature, which is nationalism of romantic music, is the composition of Frédéric Chopin, which is entitled Polonaise. Polonaise class is a dance composition for piano which is famous in Poland. And for us to better understand the music of Romantic period, let us consider its characteristics. Number 1, individualism. This is for me an important characteristic of romantic music because the composer can be able to express his ideas and thoughts in a unique way. Whoever or whatever he is, it is actually reflected into his compositions. In that way, a composition is presented in an individualistic way. The second characteristic is emotionalism. This characteristic still lies from the composer, in which he is going to relate his ideas and express his feelings to the audience through the style of his music in an emotional way. How do a composer expresses his emotions? It may be through the lyrics of the song, or if there's no lyrics, maybe based from the melody of the song. Next characteristic is subjectivity. This has something to do with how we judge a particular music. Some people may be fond of listening to happy music. Some are not, because they may be fond of listening to sad music or danceable music, or maybe worldly music. That maybe depends on the experience and the preference of a listener, and also a preference of the composer. So the beauty of music is relative as far as romantic music is concerned. The next one is favorite subjects. Composers may be fond of talking about the life of people. They may be fond of telling us about love stories, or maybe love of the country. This characteristic only shows that in romantic period, composers are free to choose their own subject. The fifth one is nationalism. As mentioned earlier, nationalism is the love of one's country. How do you show love to your own country? Like here in the Philippines. Yes, we can be able to show the love of country as Filipinos through living out the essence of our national anthem. And lastly, the rise of virtuoso composers. Or when we speak of virtuoso, this is the excellent way of playing musical instruments. Students, during the Romantic era, composers are not fond of composing songs for vocal music, but they are fond of composing songs for instrumental music. And three instrumental music are being emphasized during this era. The first one is violin, second one is piano, and third one is program music, which is very new to our ears. Later on, we will be discussing more about that. First to consider is the violin and strings music during the Romantic era. Can you see the image of the violin player? Yes, of course. He is actually Nicolo Paganini. Nicolo Paganini is considered as the most prominent composer for violin and strings music during the Romantic era. His biological or musical background. He was born on October 27, 1782 in Genoa, Italy, in a family of 6 children. His musical skills started with playing the mandolin at the age of 5. He eventually transferred his training to the violin at the age of 7 with different renowned violin professors in Italy. His violin teachers could not keep up with the progress of his violin skills that he kept on transferring from one violin teacher to another. This led him to adopt all his teachers' influences in playing the violin. Nicolo Paganini became the most famous violin virtuoso in the world. However, together with his fame came the rumors about his amazing violin skills that was said to be a gift from the devil, and that he sold his soul in exchange for those skills. He was also rumored to have problems with women and gambling. Now let's proceed to his musical compositions. Some works of Nicolo Paganini were La Campanella, 24 Caprices for solo violin opus 1, Concerto No. 1 in B minor opus 6, 15 quartets for guitar and strings trio, and the Carnival of Venice. Now let us proceed to piano music. Piano music during the Romantic era is dominated by 3 prominent composers. These are Frédéric Chopin, Franz Liszt, and Robert Schumann. Now let us first talk about Frédéric Chopin, his biological or musical background. He was known as the poet of the piano. He was born on March 1, 1810 in Zelazowa, Poland. He began to play piano at age 4. He composed Polonaise at the age of 7, as mentioned earlier. He studied piano at Warsaw Conservatory under Wilhelm Werfel, and most of his music was influenced by folk music. He finished his formal education at the higher school in 1829 and soon traveled to Europe, giving concerts in places such as Vienna, Munich, Paris, and London. He wrote almost exclusively for piano, and he made extensive use of piano pedal in most of his compositions. In 1831, Chopin arrived in Paris and met other legendary composers such as Franz Liszt, Felix Mendelssohn, and Robert Schumann. During this time in Paris, Chopin met and married the famous French writer George Sand, which later became a source of inspiration as well as a maternal figure in Chopin's life. In the later part of Chopin's life, his health began to decline and he was diagnosed with pulmonary tuberculosis. Chopin died on October 17, 1849 in Paris. Chopin's music is recognized worldwide for its beauty, and his works on the piano are mainstays in the piano repertoire. Some of his music is characterized by its beautiful tone, rhythmic flexibility, grace, and elegance. Some of his compositions like mazurkas and polonaise express his love for Poland. He really loves his country, doesn't he? His musical compositions. He composed almost primarily for the piano, and some of his well-known compositions are Fantasy in F minor, Opus 29, Revolutionary Etude, Opus 10, Number 12, and 24 Preludes, Opus 28. Chopin is famous for the following. First is ballad, a verse form usually consisting of 3 stanzas of 8 or 10 lines each, along with a brief envoy, with all 3 stanzas and envoy ending in the same one-line refrain. We also have etude, a piece composed for the development of a specific point of technique. Mazurka, a polished dance resembling the polka, frequently adopted as a ballet form, usually in triple time signature. Next is Nocturne, an instrumental composition of a pensive, dreamy mood, especially one for the piano. Next one is Polonaise, a stately march-like polished dance, primarily a promenade by couples. This is somewhat like Rigodon in the Philippines. We also have Prelude, an introductory performance, event, or action preceding a more important one. Another one is Waltz, a piece of music for dance. And also we have Impromptu, a short composition especially for the piano, performed in an offhand or extemporized style. We also have Scherzo, a musical movement of playful character, typically in ABA form. And lastly, Sonata, composition for one or more solo instrument. Second composer for piano music is Franz Liszt. His biological or musical background. The best word that describes the work of Franz Liszt is virtuosity. He was known as the virtuoso pianist, a composer, and the busiest musician during the Romantic era. He played and studied in Vienna and Paris while performing in concerts in the rest of Europe. Liszt was born in the village Doborhan, Hungary. He displayed remarkable talent at a young age and easily understood sight reading. His father was his first teacher at age 6. A turning point came when his early 20s, Liszt heard the virtuoso violinist Nicolo Paganini perform, so he decided to dedicate himself in becoming a virtuoso pianist. So he was inspired actually by Nicolo Paganini, who was the first prominent composer during this period. Liszt was also known for his symphonic poems, where he translated great literary works into musical compositions. He made piano transcriptions of operas and famous symphonies. Many of his piano compositions are technically challenging pieces. He was also known with his generosity in sharing time and money to the orphans, victims of disasters, and the many students he taught music for free. His musical compositions. Some of Liszt's piano works were La Campanella, Viebestrom No. 3. Liszt Hungarian Rhapsodies were originally written for solo piano, but many were arranged for orchestra or other combinations of instruments. There is also the Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. It is the most popular and was the basis for the Tom and Jerry cartoon called The Cat Concerto. Oh, it's really popular. And we also have Un Sospiro, Sonata in B minor, arrangements of the 9 Beethoven symphonies, transcriptions of Lieder by Schubert, orchestral composition, and it's a revival. And we also have symphonic poems, and this is the Hamlet Les Preludes. Let us proceed to the last prominent composer for the piano during the Romantic period, which is the talented Robert Schumann. His biological or musical background. One of the famous Romantic composers that beautifully combined music and words is Robert Schumann. He was a composer and music critic. Robert Alexander Schumann was born in 1810 in Zwickau. His father wanted him to study law, and so in 1821, Schumann went to Leipzig to study law. However, he spent most of his time with musical and literary circles through the effort of Friedrich Wieck, who took some time to teach Schumann how to play the piano. It was also this time when he wrote some of his first piano compositions, and he eventually convinced his family that he should put aside law in favor of performing career. In 1830, Schumann went to live with Wieck in Leipzig. He soon developed a problem with his hands, effectively ending his dreams as a pianist. It was in 1834 when Schumann founded the music journal, Journal New Zeitschrift for Music, wherein he edited and wrote music criticism for his publication. He wrote numerous write-ups, and one of which was the performance of Frédéric Chopin in Paris, France. In his journal, Schumann often wrote under 2 pseudonyms. First one is Eusebius, which is his sensitive lyrical side, and Florestan, which is fairy and stormy side. Let us proceed to his musical compositions. His piano works were Abegg Variations, Opus 1 in the year 1830, David Bandler Tanze, or Dances of the Band of David, Opus 6 in 1837. We also have Carnival Opus 9 in 1835, and this is actually a portrait of a masked ball attended by his allies and his beloved Clara. We also have Fantasy Stuck, Opus 12, 1837, a series of mood pieces. We also have Kreisleriana, Opus 16, 1838, a fantasy on the mad Kapellmeister. We also have Kinderszenen, Opus 15, in the year 1838. It is a poetic series of evocations of a children's world. And he wrote over 100 art songs, some of which are Frauenlieb and Leben, Dichterlieb, Finale, and Konzertstück in F major for 4 horns and orchestra, Opus 86. The title of these compositions are really difficult to pronounce. Sorry if I have mistaken it. Earlier, we discussed about the prominence of violin and strings music, and second is the piano music, and we will now proceed to the most important form of music during the Romantic period, and it is the program music. Program music is an instrumental music that conveys image or scenes music that tells a short story without text or lyrics, and imaginative ideas fully developed through the imaginative effort of a great and genius composer. Special mention, Hector Berlioz. And in this form of instrumental music during the Romantic era, it is actually dominated by three prominent composers. These are, of course, Hector Berlioz, Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, and Camille SaintSaens. And to proceed, let us consider first Hector Berlioz. His biological or musical background. Hector Berlioz is a French romantic composer born on December 11, 1803. At his young age, he learned to play guitar and flute but never became skilled in a specific musical instrument. His father was a physician who sent Hector to medical school, but he ended up pursuing a career in music. He assembled hundreds of musicians to produce a powerful sound. In most of his compositions, he made tone color as the basic part of his musical language. Tone color is also referring to one of the elements of music, which is timbre. His musical compositions. One of his famous musical compositions is a 5-movement symphony called Symphony Fantastique. In this composition, which is also known as Fantastic Fantasy, Berlioz showcased the important features in his composition in creating tone color. Here's a short story of the Symphony Fantastique. A young, extremely sensitive and imaginative musician tries to kill himself with opium due to depression caused by discouraged love. Unfortunately, the dose was not enough and does not kill him, but instead plunges him into a heavy sleep flocked with nightmares. His experiences, feelings, and memories are translated into hallucinations of musical thoughts and images. The girl he loves was transformed into a melody, and like a recurring theme, he meets and hears everywhere. Each movement of the symphony refers to a different vision in the young musician's mind. Sequence of Symphony Fantastique. First movement is Reveries or Passion. Second movement, it is a ball. Third movement, Scene in the Country. Fourth movement, March to the Scaffold. And fifth movement, Dream of a Witch's Sabbath. The second exponent of program music was Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. His biological or musical background. He was born on May 7, 1840 in Votkinsk, Russia, was known for his ballet music. He first studied law and became a law clerk in St. Petersburg in his 20s. And just like other composers, he rebelled and began to study music at the conservatory also in St. Petersburg. As a big fan of Mozart, Tchaikovsky studied composition with Anton Rubinstein and moved to Moscow and started teaching at the new conservatory. His musical compositions. He continued his music career in New York despite having marital problems and became famous after composing the musical poem Fatum and Romeo and Juliet. His fame peaked in the last 10 years of his life and later died due to cholera. Tchaikovsky's famous compositions were Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, The Nutcracker, Romeo and Juliet, 1812 Overture, Symphony No. 2, Symphony No. 6 Pathetic, and lastly, Piano Concerto No. 1. And the last composer of program music, and of course the last person to discuss for this video is Camille SaintSaens. His biological or musical background. Camille SaintSaens was known as a talented musician from an early age. He was born in Paris on October 9, 1835 and started his music through the help of his aunt by teaching him piano lesson when he was only 2 years old, and afterward he began composing piano pieces at age 3. He was too young, wasn't he? He was considered as a composer who creates elegant music, neat, clean, polished, and never excessive. One of his examples is the Swan. It only means that during the time of Camille SaintSaens, the period is already transforming from romantic to adaptation of the classical era. So there's already neoclassicism in this point of time when he was living. As an organist and one of the best pianists of his time, he sat very still at the piano and played gracefully and cool. Some of the facts during the peak of his career in musician and composer, many beautiful buildings, churches, and instruments were being built in France, which includes the famous Eiffel Tower. His musical compositions: Carnival of the Animals, Danse Macabre, and his Symphony No. 3. He also had The Swan, over 300 works, unusually in all genres including 3 operas, Samson and Delilah, The Only One Remembered, 5 symphonies, best known, and No. 3, The Organ Symphony. 3 concertos for violin and orchestra, 5 concertos for piano and orchestra, and 2 concertos for cello and orchestra. And that's all for today's discussion, class. So we can now conclude that the music of the Romantic period is highly expressive and highly emotional, and they are actually expressed by the prominent composers through instrumental music, which goes to 3 prominent musical instruments, namely violin, piano, and a new form of using instrumental music, which is program music. I hope, grade 9 students, that you have learned a lot from this discussion. And now let's proceed to your performance task. Your performance task is entitled Musical Concept Wrapping. The instructions are: using the concepts learned in today's lesson, for example, a particular composer's life story during the Romantic period, compose a poem and turn it into a rap. You can use instrumental music or improvised accompaniment for rap music. You're going to record a video of your performance and submit your output to your teacher through Google Classroom. And that's all for today, grade 9 students, and I thank you for listening and understanding the concepts of the music of the Romantic period. I hope that you have learned and you will experience a lot from this lesson and apply these concepts into your lives meaningfully and in the best way that you can. This has been Sir Lester saying, let's dream and make it happen. Grade 9 students, don't forget to like this video, to share to your friends, and comment down below, and also subscribe to my channel for you to be able to access more educational videos like this. So that's all for today, and goodbye! See you all on my next video.